Broke, lonely, and unattractive man stuck in a dead-end job flipping burgers at McDonald's. He has no money, no friends, and no future. One day, however, he is reincarnated as a noble in a world of swords and magic. Unfortunately, his many older siblings will inherit most of the family's wealth, leaving him essentially a poor, low-ranking noble. Now, he must find a way to become the most powerful magician and secure a comfortable life for himself. The story begins with Shingo, now known as Well, standing in the middle of a barren wasteland. A group of rough-looking workers wielding pickaxes stare at him expectantly. Concentrating his magic, Well channels energy into his right arm and releases a powerful beam, obliterating the boulders in front of him and leveling the land. The workers cheer before returning to their labor, mining the ground. Well watches as they clear away the rubble when another young man approaches, complimenting his magic. Even the laborers are surprised that a noble's magic is being used to develop the land. Just as Well is about to leave, his butler Roderick asks for his help in clearing more land. Hours later, exhausted, Well finally teleports home, where his wives eagerly welcome him. Over tea, they tease him about how Roderick is working him to the bone. Well, accustomed to overwork from his previous life, brushes it off, though his wives don't quite understand what he means. As he retreats to his room, Well sighs. Even after 10 years in this new world, he still isn't fully accustomed to it. A decade ago, he was just a regular McDonald's employee, coming home to an empty apartment and cooking meals alone. One fateful night, after dozing off in front of his late-night dinner, he awoke to an entirely different meal. Confused, he looked down at his reflection in a plate, only to see a child's face staring back. He had been reborn into a different world. Surrounding him were musicians and guests at what appeared to be a wedding celebration. At first, he thought he was in another country, but everyone was speaking Japanese. He wondered if he was dreaming, yet everything felt too real, even the meal in front of him. As he closed his eyes, hoping to wake up, an elderly man's voice commanded him to stand. The man led him to a group of guests, prompting him to introduce himself. Overwhelmed by the stares of the adults, Shingo panicked until an older boy named Eric stepped in, introducing him as Wendelin von Benno Baumeister, the youngest son of the noble family. Later, Eric sat beside Well and asked if he had frozen up earlier. Taking the opportunity, Well tried to gather information. Since he was only 5 years old, Eric explained everything again. Today was their eldest brother Kurt's wedding. He had married Amelie, the second daughter of Sir Mainbach. Their father had struggled to find a suitable bride for his heir, so he was relieved when a noblewoman agreed to marry into the family. Well also learned that despite their title, they were part of the lower nobility. As the night progressed, the wedding guests indulged in drinking and merriment. Well, still adjusting to his new body and situation, was at least relieved that he understood the language and could read the signs around him. Seeing the grandeur of the ceremony, he assumed his family must be wealthy. If he was the third son, then surely he wouldn't have to worry about work or starvation. Content, he picked up his fork and continued enjoying the feast. However, the next morning he was shocked to find a meager breakfast of dry bread and watery soup. While his family ate as if nothing was amiss, he noticed the peeling wallpaper, faded paintings, and a dining table barely held together. When his older brother returned from fishing, Well finally asked about their financial situation. After hosting such a grand wedding, how could they be so poor? Eric explained that as nobles, they couldn't afford to appear miserly in front of guests. In reality, however, their family was struggling to make ends meet. The cracked walls from the night before had simply been covered with curtains, and the extravagant feast was just a one-time occasion. Now they were back to their daily meals of hard bread and watery soup. Well, couldn't understand it. Even as the third son of a noble family, he should still be entitled to some level of comfort. However, his confusion grew when his brother Eric greeted another sibling, Helmut, who had just returned from hunting. Soon, two more brothers, Paul and Herman, joined the conversation. Eric then casually mentioned that two more of their brothers hadn't even attended the wedding. It finally dawned on Well. His family wasn't just poor. He was actually the eighth son of a struggling noble house. It seemed like his parents had been a little too enthusiastic in the bedroom. Trying to get a grasp of his new world, Well began studying his surroundings. He learned that they lived in the kingdom of Helmut, whose capital, Stuttgart, had a population of 1 million. To the south was the dukedom of Bleichroder, and even farther south lay their home, the Baumeister Knightdom, a rural area with only 800 residents. And as the eighth son of a minor noble family, his future prospects were looking grim. Just as he was sinking into despair, Well noticed three of his brothers saying their farewells to their mother. Curious, he rushed over to ask what was happening. Eric explained that since the family's land couldn't be divided, their eldest brother Kurt would inherit everything, while Herman would marry into a branch family. As for the others, they had no choice but to leave for the capital to start new lives, effectively losing their noble status. Before leaving, Eric ruffled Wells' hair and advised him to start learning some useful skills instead of wasting time. Watching his brothers depart, Well felt a pang of sadness but quickly resolved to prepare for his own future. Determined, he headed straight to the family's library, only to be disappointed when all he could find were poetry and romance books. While putting them back on the shelf, he accidentally knocked over a small box. Inside, he found a piece of paper and a crystal ball. Curious, he read the paper, which explained that the crystal ball was a magic aptitude device used to measure a person's potential for magic. At first, Well scoffed at the idea. Magic couldn't possibly be real, but then he reminded himself that he was in an entirely different world now. Continuing to read, he learned that only 1 in 1,000 people had enough mana to use magic. His hopes immediately began to fade, but despite his doubts, he decided to test his luck. The paper went on to explain that magic isn't inherited. It can manifest in anyone, regardless of their lineage. The crystal ball is meant to determine if someone has the potential to become a magician. Well wasn't particularly optimistic about his chances, but he figured there's no harm in trying. He placed the crystal ball on the desk and attempted to channel his mana into it. At first, nothing happened, just as he expected. He wasn't too disappointed. This was the outcome he had anticipated. But then, to his astonishment, the crystal suddenly lit up with an intense white glow. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, a long-haired man sensed a disturbance and looked around, intrigued. Back in the castle, Well was still in shock that the crystal had reacted to him. He quickly grabbed the paper again, searching for an explanation. According to the instructions, the ball would shine in rainbow colors if the user had a strong aptitude for magic. It also suggested that those with such potential should begin training with specialized magic books. Excited, Well frantically scoured the library for any books on magic. Unfortunately, all he found were novels, travel guides, and poetry collections, nothing remotely related to magic. Just then, his father entered the library, looking for him. Wells seized the opportunity to ask if they had any other books, but his father admitted that he couldn't even read, so their family's entire book collection was limited to this one room. Instead, he instructed Well to head into the forest to gather firewood. Later, in the forest, Well made several attempts to activate his magic, using a random stick as a wand. No matter what he did, though, nothing seemed to work. Frustrated, he slumped onto the ground in despair until a voice unexpectedly spoke to him. Startled, he looks up to see a long-haired man descending from the sky. The stranger seems pleased, claiming that he's finally found someone on the same wavelength as himself. He kneels before Well and asks for his name, but Well, terrified, brandishes his stick in a feeble attempt to scare him off. The man chuckles and apologizes for startling him before casually flicking the stick away. He then introduces himself as a magician. Meanwhile, the discarded stick rolls off the edge of a nearby cliff, inadvertently knocking loose a massive boulder. The rock tumbles down the cliffside, crashing into the ground with a heavy impact. Curious, Well and the magician peer over the edge, only to see that the boulder has landed squarely on a gigantic wild boar. The beast, undeterred, shoves the rock aside and spots them standing at the top of the cliff. Mistaking them for attackers, the furious boar lets out a deafening roar before charging straight up the cliff toward them. Well, panicked, immediately turns to flee. Just as Well is about to run, the man suddenly grabs him and prevents him from fleeing. He pulls Well back and directs his hands toward the oncoming boar, instructing him to focus on his wind magic. Well lets out a panicked scream, but the man calmly explains that he must first visualize his mana circulating throughout his body. As they concentrate, both of them begin glowing with a green light, and energy starts gathering in Well's hand. Though still terrified, Well's magic finally activates, unleashing a blast of wind that pushes the boar back. The creature remains enraged, but this time, the man steps in and effortlessly uses his own magic to hurl it aside. He then formally introduces himself as Alfred Rainford, a former court magician of the Bleichroder dukedom. Back home, Well continues to be disheartened by their daily meals. Dinner consists of tea so weak that it might as well be water. He can't help but compare it to the rich, flavorful tea he had with Alfred. During their post-battle tea, Alfred reveals that he wants to pass down his magical knowledge to Well. Well is confused. After all, he has no way to pay for such training. But Alfred assures him that he's only looking for a disciple. Before they begin, Alfred warns him to keep his magic a secret. If word gets out, people might insist that he become the next lord, sparking a succession conflict. The next day, their training begins with a technique called matching capacities, which allows Well to align his mana reserves with someone possessing a greater capacity. As they clasp hands and channel their energy, Well is amazed by the sensation of Alfred's mana flowing through him. Alfred, in turn, is pleasantly surprised. He had been concerned that Well might not be able to match his capacity, as magical reserves are typically predetermined at birth. However, Well not only matches Alfred's level, he surpasses it, with no signs of reaching his limit. Meanwhile, at home, Well's father examines the crystal ball in their family library, puzzled by its change in position. He recalls that Well was in the library recently and chuckles, assuming his son must have been disappointed after failing the magic test. His heir, Kurt, joins in the laughter, convinced that Well simply confirmed his lack of talent. Unbeknownst to them, Well is already practicing fire magic. Alfred commends his rapid progress, impressed that he has mastered advanced spells in just a few days. To maintain the illusion that Well is merely doing chores in the forest, Alfred even brings a basket of mountain vegetables for him to take home. That evening, Well's family praises him for collecting such an impressive haul of vegetables. However, Kurt looks irritated and their father eyes him suspiciously, pointing to a particular vegetable. That plant only grows on the far side of the river, so how exactly did Well manage to get it? Did he use magic to fly across? Kurt begins to suspect that Well might actually have magic, but their father just laughs at the absurdity of the idea. A few days later, Well and Alfred are soaring through the sky, with Well practicing his tracking magic. He senses the vibrations and terrain below, and once he pinpoints his target, he launches a rock using wind magic, striking it with precision. The two then roast the bird and share the meal with Well, while even offering Alfred some spicy wasabi. Surprisingly, Alfred doesn't react to the heat at all. As they eat, Alfred warns Well to avoid venturing too deep into the forest. While it's full of valuable herbs and food, it's also home to monsters far beyond Well's abilities, and those who enter rarely return. After the meal, Well confesses that he's been feeling watched lately. Wherever he goes, Kurt seems to be secretly observing him. Alfred speculates that Kurt has realized Well's magical potential and is now worried about his own position as heir. Well, however, has no desire to be lord. It sounds like too much trouble, and he doesn't want to cause problems for his brother. The issue is, he also has no real plans for the future. Alfred suggests adventuring, which intrigues Well. He closes his eyes and imagines what that life might be like. Meanwhile, a sudden violet aura flares up on Alfred's arm. He quickly grabs his hand and suppresses the energy, desperately pleading for more time. During dinner, Well announces his decision to become an adventurer. His older brother seems pleased, but their father points out that they don't have enough money to enroll him in the Adventurers Academy. At their next training session, Alfred takes Well to see Breichberg, the town where the academy is located. As a mercantile hub, it allows people to join merchant guilds and earn money. Well realizes he could support himself by selling goods. However, before he can get there, he must first learn how to travel long distances, one way being through flying magic. Without warning, Alfred grabs Well by the arms and launches them into the sky. Well screams in terror at first, but once Alfred slows down, he takes in the breathtaking view of the vast world below. Later that night, Alfred once again struggles against his dark curse. The next day, Well is practicing his flight when Alfred informs him that this will be their final training session. Shocked, Well begs him to stay, arguing that they've only trained for 2 weeks, but Alfred firmly refuses. During dinner, their father shares news that a whispering dead was spotted in the forest. This undead creature looks human and can even speak, but it's already a corpse, incapable of feeling pain. After a few years, it will lose its consciousness and turn into a mindless zombie. Well, suddenly recalls how Alfred always felt cold to the touch and didn't react to the spiciness of the wasabi. Alarmed, he flies into the dark forest in search of his master. Struggling in the pitch black night, he crashes into the ground but eventually finds Alfred. Well urgently warns him about the undead sighting and tries to pull him away, only for Alfred to confess the truth. He is the Whispering Dead. 5 years ago, Alfred was accompanying the Duke on a quest for medicine when they were ambushed by monsters. He fought to protect the retreating Duke, but ultimately perished when his mana was completely depleted. However, Alfred remained undead because he had one final wish to pass on his magic knowledge. When he sensed Well's presence, he was overjoyed, believing he had finally found someone to inherit his teachings. Now he can finally move on, but only if Well completes his final trial, purging him with holy magic. Well protests, unwilling to go through with it, but Alfred reveals the spreading undeath consuming his body. He doesn't have much time left. If he lingers any longer, he will lose himself and become a mindless zombie. With no other choice, Alfred begins teaching Well how to use holy magic. As Well casts the spell, the dark aura surrounding Alfred begins to dissipate, and Alfred cries out in pain. Despite the agony, he urges Well to continue. Tears stream down Well's face. He doesn't want to say goodbye, but Alfred reminds him to cherish everything he has learned. With a heavy heart, Well bows and thanks his master before finally releasing him from his undead state. Alfred smiles in relief as his form fades into the light, leaving Well with a final piece of advice: to live his life to the fullest. Overcome with grief, Well lets out a sorrowful scream into the night. But after a moment, he wipes his tears and forces a smile, vowing to honor his master's final words. Years later, Well bids farewell to his mother and sets out to fulfill his dream of becoming an adventurer. The Adventurer Academy is bustling with life, filled with the sounds of students sparring and training together. In one of the classrooms, newly enrolled students take turns introducing themselves. A blue-haired girl introduces herself as Louise, while a pink-haired girl follows, introducing herself as Ina. When Well gives his introduction, the teacher distributes papers for the students to fill out. Much to their dismay, it's for a dreaded group project. They are required to form a party with other students. During dinner, Well already feels isolated as no one sits beside him. At a nearby table, Louise and Ina gossip about him. Well is the only scholarship student in their batch. A blonde-haired boy named Erwin chimes in, revealing that Well's magic power is so immense that even the instructor gave up on teaching him. If anyone managed to team up with Well, their academy life would become incredibly easy. This explains why everyone is staring at him, yet keeping their distance. They're too intimidated to approach him. Fortunately, Erwin has a strategy. They assume that Well remains alone because he's silently evaluating everyone. So, if they band together, with Erwin as the best swordsman, Louise as the top martial artist, and Ina as the strongest spear user, they might be able to attract Well into their party. Meanwhile, Well is completely unaware of their discussion. Determined to make friends, he considers sharing his condiments as a gesture of goodwill. However, before he can act, a group of students loudly confronts Erwin's group, declaring that Well will be joining their team, the Axe Trio. Confused, Well has no idea what's going on. Instead, he simply envies how close everyone already seems to be and quietly sits back down, feeling dejected. In the next class, their teacher assigns them a hunting exercise. Excited, Well hopes to finally form a party, but as he looks around, he sees that everyone has already grouped up. Nearby, Louise considers inviting Well to their team, but Erwin quickly stops her, cautioning that they might end up disappointing him if they rush things. They mistakenly interpret Well's decision to hunt alone as a challenge, believing they need to catch even more creatures to match his level. A few hours later, the students present their prey to the instructor. Erwin's group is feeling confident, having successfully captured 3 large boars. However, when Well arrives, he casually pulls out a magic bag, an heirloom from Alfred, and starts unloading his bounty. One by one, he fills the entire table with various animals, shocking everyone. Realizing the vast difference in their abilities, the Axe Trio concedes that Well is completely out of their league and abandons any hope of recruiting him. Others in the room come to the same conclusion and quietly slip away. Meanwhile, Well, overwhelmed by his own success, receives a generous bounty for his kills. He turns around, intending to invite everyone to a celebratory meal, only to find himself alone. That night, Erwin vents his frustrations to Louise and Ina. As younger siblings in their respective families, they were treated as expendable. Ironically, when they awakened their latent abilities, they surpassed their older relatives, leading to their families shunning them out of embarrassment. Fueled by anger and determination, they refuse to let their dreams be crushed simply because of their birth order. They make a pact. They will earn Wells' recognition. The next day, Erwin and the girls venture deep into the forest, intent on proving themselves. Unfortunately, they quickly find themselves surrounded by a pack of wolves. Luckily, Well happens to be hunting nearby and senses their predicament using his tracking magic. Thinking that saving them might help him befriend them, he rushes toward the scene. Meanwhile, Erwin, Louise, and Ina struggle against the relentless wolves. Their skill is impressive, but the sheer number of attackers is overwhelming. Erwin sustains an injury, and just as more wolves prepare to pounce, Well finally arrives. With a single spell, jagged rock spikes erupt across the battlefield, launching the wolves backward and forming a protective barrier around his classmates. Later, the trio apologizes for the trouble and admits that their only goal was to gain Wells' recognition. Well is confused, but they continue, acknowledging that his magic is on an entirely different level, S rank, beyond their reach. Because of this, they decide to abandon their goal of forming a party with him. Just as Well is about to stop them, their instructor bursts in with surprising news. The Duke has personally invited them to a prestigious gathering. The classroom erupts with excitement at the idea of attending such an esteemed event. However, a skeptical classmate remarks that the invitation is likely just a ploy for the Duke to establish contact with Well, the prodigy of their class. Overhearing this, Well feels disheartened that his classmates undervalue themselves. The only ones unfazed are Erwin, Louise, and Ina, who are already enthusiastically discussing their outfits. At the party, their classmates' theory is proven correct when Duke Blycroder completely ignores everyone else and heads straight for Well. Introducing himself as Amadeus, the Duke invites Well for a private discussion. To everyone's shock, Well insists on bringing Louise, Ina, and Erwin, firmly declaring them his party members. Inside the Duke's mansion, Amadeus introduces Well to his court magician, Brantag Ringstadt, who turns out to be Alfred's former teacher. Brantag reveals that he sensed Alfred's presence fade 7 years ago, leading him to believe that Alfred, as an undead, had finally achieved peace. Noting that Well hails from the same region where Alfred passed away and carries Alfred's magic bag, Brantag directly asks if Well was Alfred's disciple. Well solemnly confirms it and recounts his master's final moments. Brantag is saddened that such a young boy had to go through the painful experience of exorcising his own mentor, but he is also deeply grateful to Well for granting Alfred the peace he sought. Well returns the supplies from the Duke's army that had been stored in the magic bag from his previous trip to the forest. After the meeting, Ina and the others reflect on what they overheard and feel ashamed for misjudging Well. They realize he was just like them, a spare child in a noble family. When Well arrives, they apologize, admitting they initially wanted to use his power to improve their own standing. Well laughs and admits he also used them to avoid being alone with the creepy Duke. However, he genuinely wants to be in a party with them. The group laughs and happily accepts him. Later, the Duke informs Well that he will receive a finder's fee for returning Alfred's belongings, amounting to 1,000 gold coins. Additionally, he will inherit Alfred's estate. That night, while dining in his new mansion, Well feels lonely and wonders if his friends would be willing to live with him. Well and his friends travel to the capital in a magic airship to attend his brother Eric's wedding. Louise, excited, has already dressed in her most eye-catching outfit, hoping to charm a noble into hiring her. Since Eric is marrying into the Brant family, many nobles will be present. Meanwhile, Erwin clings to a pole, not to dance, but out of sheer distrust of the flying ship. Brantag, acting as their guide, reassures them that magic airships never fall. Unfortunately, he speaks too soon as dark clouds gather and a massive skeletal dragon appears. The passengers immediately panic, complaining to the crew, who assure them that Brantag, the great magician, will handle it. However, in the ship's bridge, Brantag admits he can't defeat an undead dragon as he lacks holy magic. Instead, he turns to Well, who protests but ultimately gets pressured into helping. Using flight magic, Well approaches the dragon, which spews dark miasma at him. A barrier protects him, but the trees below wither away. Meanwhile, Brantog maintains a large barrier around the airship to protect the passengers. Well begins casting holy magic, but the dragon notices and charges at him, leading to a tense chase through the sky. Just in time, Well finishes his spell and blasts the dragon, cutting through its acid breath. As it dies, the dragon makes a final desperate attack, but Well shields himself with a barrier. Moments later, the dragon disintegrates, leaving only bones. Well collects the bones with his magic bag and finds a large red gem, the dragon's core. Back on the airship, the passengers celebrate with a party where Brantog introduces his old friend, Aroterio, now a merchant. The next morning, while most are still recovering from the festivities, Well and his friends look toward the horizon as they approach Strutberg. Upon arrival, Brantog slips away, leaving them in Aroterio's care. Just as the king's knights arrive to thank Well for slaying the dragon, his friends promptly ditch him at the palace doors, leaving him to face the king with Aroterio. Thankfully, the king simply grants Well the noble title of baronet as a reward. At Eric's house, Brantag and the others discuss Well's promotion. Eric is shocked that his younger brother now outranks their father and even has the potential to start his own noble line. Ina and the others worry that Well might quit being an adventurer, but Brantog reassures them that having a title doesn't mean he has to give up his current life. Well is still free to choose his own path. Back at the castle, Well is already experiencing the burdens of nobility. The nobles are locked in a debate over how much to pay him for the magic bones and gem he collected from the dragon. Cardinal Hohenheim steps in to mediate, urging them to settle on a fair price. Meanwhile, Aroterio explains to Well that both the Cardinal and Lord Marshal Edgar are trying to gain his favor, hoping to align him with either the church or the military. By the time Well is finally allowed to leave, the sun is already setting. Just as he steps outside, a man suddenly yells at him and begins spinning a spear wildly, resembling a human fidget spinner. Aroterio deduces that the man is likely a knight hoping to become Well's retainer. Fortunately, the guards quickly intervene and escort the enthusiastic knight away. At Eric's wedding, Well notices his older brothers looking dejected. They explain that their family has yet to send a wedding gift, which could make them appear rude to the other nobles. Their eldest brother, Kurt, had only sent a letter explaining that they simply couldn't afford one. To make matters worse, this situation could also damage the reputation of the Duke of Bleichroder. Traditionally, a duke would provide financial aid to a struggling vassal, but their father's stubborn pride prevents him from asking for a loan. Concerned for his brothers, Well offers to cover the cost of the wedding gift himself. The wedding ceremony proceeds smoothly, and Well happily applauds Eric and his bride. However, deep down, he finds noble life to be an exhausting ordeal. Thankfully, his luck improves after the festivities when Aroterio presents him with an unexpected gift, a jar of soybeans, something Well had been hoping to find in the city. Excited, Well immediately teleports himself and his friends back home, where they spend the entire night cooking the soybeans. Using magic to accelerate fermentation, Well is finally able to make miso soup. He shares the meal with his friends and family, savoring the taste of home while silently vowing to become the best noble he can be. The next chapter begins with Well undergoing a baptism ceremony performed by Cardinal Hohenheim. As a gesture of gratitude for welcoming him into their faith, Well offers the cardinal a generous gift. At that moment, a knock on the door interrupts them as someone arrives to serve tea. The instant Well lays eyes on the girl in the nun's uniform, he is immediately captivated. She introduces herself as Elise, the cardinal's granddaughter. As Well rises to introduce himself, he senses something unusual about her. She has the ability to use magic. The cardinal confirms Well's suspicions, revealing that Elise can indeed use holy healing magic, which is quite remarkable since even Well is only capable of using holy purification magic. Elise currently helps heal the wounded at the church and has earned the title of Saint Hohenheim. However, Cardinal Hohenheim wishes for her to lead a normal life and eventually marry, and many families have already expressed interest in her. Well jokingly suggests he might compete for her hand, though he's still underage. The cardinal agrees and asks if they might consider marriage once Well comes of age. Well laughs in agreement, but his laugh rings out alone. Within minutes of meeting Elise, Well finds himself engaged to her. Later, Cardinal Hohenheim is having tea alone in his garden, discussing with his butler whether it was wise to move so quickly with Well and Elise's engagement. The cardinal had already obtained the king's permission, ensuring that even Duke Bleichroder, Well's superior, can't object. More importantly, they see the benefits of aligning with Well, especially since the chest of gold he gifted them shows the church's influence. As a Viscount family, having Elise marry a baronet will certainly help their status. Meanwhile, at his brother's house, Well shares the news of his engagement with his friends, who are all happy for him, though Well remains dissatisfied. He had hoped to get to know the girl first before getting engaged. His friends remind him that not knowing your spouse beforehand is actually quite common. Eric, for example, only met his wife on their wedding day. They urge Well to close his eyes so they can put clown makeup on him. Well, now disguised as a clown, roams the capital without anyone recognizing him as the Dragon Slayer. While shopping, Erwin encourages him to buy a gift for his future wife, making Well wonder what Elise thinks of their sudden engagement. After his shopping trip, Well accidentally runs into the spear-wielding man who had previously begged to be his retainer. Erwin assures him that no one will recognize Well in his clown outfit. But to their surprise, the man notices Well's teeth, and soon, knights are clamoring to be hired by him. As the man prepares to spin his spear again, Well teleports away before any trouble starts. Back at home, Eric suggests that Well should just hire a retainer to stop the constant offers. Erwin quickly volunteers and is immediately hired by Well. Erwin is stunned by the unexpected job offer, while Well simply pulls out the gift he bought for Elise and leaves. Erwin, still in shock, stands there happily, realizing he's now a retainer. Well sneaks into the Hohenheim mansion by teleporting into their garden. Cardinal Hohenheim nearly catches him, but Well quickly drops to the ground to avoid being seen. When Elise spots him, he quickly grabs her hand and pulls her out of sight before the cardinal can catch them. They hide on the rooftop, where Well pulls out the cookies he bought for Elise. Unfortunately, all the hiding has ruined the cookies. He conceals them behind him and suggests they just have a chat for a while. When he asks her what she thinks of the engagement, Elise simply smiles and says she likes it. Her grandfather has chosen Well, and she is happy to become the wife of the Dragon Slayer. Back at their home, Erwin proudly boasts to Ina and Louise that he is already Well's retainer. The two girls are annoyed, having spent their afternoon shopping for clothes. They wonder if they should also try to become Well's retainers, but Erwin grins, confident that they would be his subordinates, since he was the first retainer. When Eric and his wife appear, Erwin becomes distracted, while Louise comes up with an alternative idea to one-up Erwin. All they have to do is become Well's concubines. When Well arrives, Louise immediately tries to charm him with her new clothes and awkward dance moves. Well has no idea what she is doing and simply walks out. Later that night, Louise cuts up her new clothes to make herself more appealing to Well. Ina admires Louise's determination, but Louise confesses she is only doing it in hopes her family will recognize her when she opens her own dojo. Inspired by her resolve, Ina decides to give it her all as well. Meanwhile, Well had received a dinner invitation from Elise. The next day, they shared a rather awkward meal. Afterward, Well was about to leave when the Hohenheim butler leaned in and suggested he buy Elise something to commemorate their first date. So they headed to a nearby jewelry store. Rings of various sizes and gems lined the shelves, but to Well, they all seemed tacky and unrefined. Elise quietly insisted he didn't need to buy her something expensive, but Well reassured her that he could afford it, especially with the reward he received for slaying the dragon. He then noticed a simple ring tucked in the corner of the store. The owner suggested buying something else, claiming the ring was too plain for an engagement, but Well noticed how Elise smiled when she saw it. He decided to purchase it, even though it turned out to be 6 times more expensive than the others because it was made from a magic stone. On their way home, Elise asked Eskamamers, Well, if he knew the ring was made from a magic stone. The store owner had mentioned it could store great magical power, and she wondered if he had bought it with that in mind. Well clarified that wasn't the case. He chose the ring because he thought it suited her. He then admitted that during his time in the capital, he had been exhausted by the pressure of being called a dragon slayer. He was amazed by Elise, who had withstood the pressure of being called a saint from a young age. As he infused the ring with magic, the carriage filled with a red light, creating an illusion of starlight around them. The display amazed Well, while Elise simply gazed at him, touched by their heartfelt conversation. Later that night, Cardinal Hohenheim asked the butler for his opinion on Well. The butler replied that Well was a hard person to read, but he did notice that, unlike other men who treated Elise like a saint, Well treated her like a normal young woman. Meanwhile, Erwin, Louise, and Ina were enjoying their stay in the capital. Erwin asked how their plan to seduce Well was going, but the girls insisted they weren't in a rush. Well was busy with Elise, so they would wait until they returned to Breichberg to make their move. To their surprise, Elise suddenly arrived, but luckily she hadn't overheard their conversation. Erwin informed her that Well had been summoned to the palace. Elise wasn't there just to meet Well. She wanted to learn more about him. She wanted to know what kind of man he truly was. At the palace, the king had asked Well to slay another dragon. Since Well was still technically a noble under the king's rule, he had no choice but to agree. The knight commander briefed Well and Brantag on their latest mission. They planned to develop the nearby Palkenia Prairie to alleviate the capital's food shortage. However, the prairie was home to an ancient dragon named Gregorland. As only mages could withstand a dragon's breath, they wanted Well and Brantag's help to drive it away. Though Well wasn't sure if two mages could defeat such a powerful dragon, the king had another man for the job. A muscular man burst into the room, greeting everyone enthusiastically. He knelt before the king and boldly declared that the three of them would go to Palkenia Prairie and defeat the dragon. This was Armstrong, the palace magician who, despite his warrior-like appearance, was a powerful mage. The three then set off, flying toward the prairie, with Armstrong leading the way and impressing Well with his speed. They were headed to a military garrison at the prairie's border to finalize their strategy and preparations. Back at Eric's place, Eric briefed the others on Well's new mission. It turned out that Well wasn't just tasked with killing the dragon. Once the dragon was dealt with, there was a risk that the monsters in the prairie might attack nearby towns, so Well would also need to eliminate them. He was even authorized to raise a temporary army for the task. The group questioned why a noble with an actual army wasn't assigned the mission, but Eric revealed the political reason. If a landed noble did it, they might claim the land, whereas, well, as a noble of the robe could simply be rewarded with medals and money, leaving the royal family with the land. Meanwhile, a commotion outside their estate signaled that a group of knights was gathering to become Well's retinue, led by the human fidget spinner, still spinning his spear. These knights would form Well's temporary army. Erwin, who already pitied whoever would lead them, soon learned that it would be him. Since Well was away, Erwin, as Well's retainer, was expected to take the lead. Despite his protests, the others assured him he would be fine. The following days saw Erwin marching the temporary army toward Palkenia Prairie. This army, made up of noble children and masterless retainers, was eager for glory and to rise in rank. At night, Erwin shared a tent with his party members, who, like him, were anxious about their first battle. The girls were particularly nervous, but at least they only had to face normal monsters, unlike Kraged. Well, who had fought a skeletal dragon in his debut battle. Another new recruit, Elise, joined the campaign. As a healer, she had been ordered to assist. She asked where Well was, and Erwin explained that he was camping near the dragon's den, preparing for the battle that would begin at dawn. At dawn, Well, Brantag, and Armstrong surveyed the dragon's den, which was located in a large crater filled with strange, claw-like rocks. The ground trembled as the dragon stirred from its sleep, and the rocks cracked open, revealing the green dragon beneath. The dragon let out a terrifying roar, signaling the start of the battle. Armstrong quickly cast an armor spell, donning steel plate armor and wielding a large hammer. He leaped into the sky and struck the dragon's head with his hammer. Well was amazed at Armstrong's power, especially since his magic turned his magical energy into physical strength. Armstrong's armor was also far more durable than their usual magical barriers. After throwing the dragon back to the ground, Brantag warned Well to prepare. Armstrong was wrestling the dragon into submission, making Well wonder why they needed him at all. Brantag explained that Armstrong's magic consumed a lot of mana, and if it ran out, Armstrong would die. That's why he was trying to subdue the dragon quickly, so Well could land the finishing blow. When Armstrong signaled, Well cast his magic to restrain the massive dragon. Meanwhile, back with the army, Elise gazed into the distance, thinking about Well. Erwin and the others arrived with breakfast, hoping to distract her from her worries. They even shared Well's favorite food, miso soup, which they had created together. Their lighthearted conversation lifted Elise's spirits until a soldier arrived with new information. Well had just defeated the dragon successfully. Back in the field, he stored the dragon's body in his magical bag. This mission didn't offer much in terms of rewards, so they planned to sell the dragon's corpse for extra income. However, Armstrong and Brantag cautioned Well as well that the hardest part was still ahead. Hours later, Elise was at camp, tirelessly working to heal the wounded. The front lines were overrun with monsters, and injured soldiers kept arriving. Some of them even said that the only reason they were holding their ground was because of the mages. Elise overheard this, and her worry for Well intensified. But she focused on her task. She spent the whole night healing as many as she could, even using the magic stored in the ring Well had given her. Eventually, she took a break. A knight nearby noticed her and asked if she was truly engaged to the Dragon Slayer. Elise asked if Well was safe on the front lines, and the knight reassured her that Well was not only safe but was the key to their victory. The knight praised heroes like Well for being above the rest. His words made Elise remember what Well had told her. He didn't like being called a hero because of the pressure it brought. She felt sorrow for his sacrifice, as Well continued to pretend to be their hero. Elise decided to stand by his side and fulfill her role as Saint Hohenheim. She spent the whole night healing, and when her mana was depleted, she asked a fellow medic for medical supplies to treat wounds the old-fashioned way. Fortunately, a soldier soon arrived, shouting that they had won. However, they needed a rescue team since Sir Baumeister was injured. Elise panicked and rushed to the injured soldiers. She called out for Well, but as she passed by the group, she realized the injured person was one of Well's brothers. A voice then called out to her. It was Well, looking relieved but happy to see her. Elise was overwhelmed with relief, and the stress hit her all at once, causing her to faint. When Elise woke up, Well was there by her side. He told her how he had heard on the front lines that she healed every wounded soldier sent back. Thanks to her, everyone had been able to fight until the end. Well was about to leave to get her water, but Elise grabbed his hand and expressed that she understood his reluctance to be called a hero. A little later, Armstrong arrived and hugged Elise tightly. To Well's surprise, Armstrong is actually Elise's uncle. A few days later, Well and his party moved their belongings into a new house. With their recent successes, they're staying in the capital indefinitely. Elise visits to bring Well some miso soup, and he greets her warmly. She also wants to clarify something. Since Well lives with Louise and Ina, she thought he was already engaged to them. Well quickly explains that they're just party members living together, and he takes the opportunity to ask her opinion on concubines. Elise is fine with it, just like everyone else, Well asks. As a result, he can't refuse when Louise and Ina offer to become his concubines once again. The next episode begins with a wedding, this time for Well's brother, Helmut, who is marrying into another knightdom. Each of them is rising in the world, especially Well, who is drawing the attention of the entire kingdom. The kingdom is holding a tournament, and all nobles are expected to participate at least once in their lifetime. Unfortunately, the only events are swordsmanship, spearmanship, archery, and hand-to-hand combat. As a noble, Well is expected to participate in swordsmanship. He wonders if he could enhance his body with magic like Armstrong, but Eric warns him that magic is not allowed in the tournament. Every morning, Louise, Ina, and Erwin go on their morning run. Erwin always complains to the girls about how unfair it is that they use magic to enhance themselves, wishing he had enough magic power to do the same. Meanwhile, they notice Onnos Well flying overhead, looking serious and heading somewhere. Later, Brantug stops by to inform the girls that Duke Amadeus has ordered them to join the tournament as well. They are expected to put up a fight worthy of noble daughters. The two girls quickly stand and leave to begin training to fight without magic in preparation for the tournament. Meanwhile, Erwin continues lounging on the sofa, unconcerned as he has nothing to lose, even if he gets defeated. However, Brantag points out that if he doesn't train, the others might see him as a liability and kick him out of the group. At dinner, Well announces that the past tournament winner, Warren, has decided to withdraw from the tournament to give others a chance to shine, making the competition a little easier. He also asks for permission to add Elise to their party, and the others agree, knowing her healing magic would be valuable. However, Erwin feels anxious about his place in the party and loudly declares he will win the tournament and not be left behind. The next day, Erwin gives his all during their training, leaving the two girls behind. Well, nearly exhausted, struggles to keep up. They train with pull-ups and weapons, and Well struggles to control his sword. Despite this, they all continue training into the night, while Well ends up bedridden from exhaustion. Erwin trains so hard that his hand bleeds from gripping his sword, but he continues. The girls start to believe that Erwin might actually win the tournament. Unfortunately, they soon receive bad news. Warren has been ordered by the king to rejoin the tournament and act as an obstacle for the younger competitors. Erwin is disappointed and heads to his room. The girls try to cheer him up, assuring him that it's okay if he doesn't win, but Erwin insists that someone like him, without magic, needs to achieve results. He believes the girls can't understand his feelings because they have magic, which hurts Ina and Louise, who quietly leave. The next morning, Erwin asks, or rather, meaning for mask currently F5, well, if he plans to kick him out of the party if he doesn't win the tournament. However, Well is preoccupied with another concern. Elise is nervous about joining the party as she hasn't trained physically at all. Erwin realizes that everyone has their own insecurities, so he goes outside and apologizes to the girls. On the day of the tournament, everyone heads to the arena, with Elise bringing lunch for them to enjoy after the fights. In Wells' first match, he unexpectedly faces his biggest rival, Warren, the Knight Commander and past champion. Well draws his sword and steels himself, but when the bell rings to start the duel, Warren rushes forward and knocks him out instantly with a blow to the stomach. When Well wakes up, he joins the others for tea, while they continue to fight in their own matches. Erwin advances in the swordsmanship division, Ina in the spearmanship division, and Louise in hand-to-hand combat. Unfortunately, Louise is eliminated in the semifinals, though Brantog commends her for earning a good ranking despite the disadvantage of her magic fist style, which doesn't work in duels that prohibit magic. Ina also makes it to the final preliminaries in the spearmanship division, where her opponent turns out to be the human fidget spinner. He's excited to face her, hoping Well is watching. At the start of the duel, the man thrusts at Ina, who counters but is disarmed when he uses his signature spinning move. Ina reports her loss to the others, noting that Roderich, the human fidget spinner, is surprisingly strong. He comes from a merchant family and is knowledgeable about accounting and the law. However, she notices that Well isn't paying attention. He's asleep because he was the one who prepared all the food Elise brought. Meanwhile, Erwin wins his semifinal match, but he sustains a deep shoulder wound. To make matters worse, his next opponent is Warren. The girls patch up his wounds, while an official urges him to forfeit, as his injuries are too serious. But Erwin is determined to continue, resolved to win the tournament. The girls reveal that they overheard Brantag's conversation with him. Erwin acknowledges that Brantag was just speaking the truth, that he could become a liability, but the girls show him the lunch they brought, proof that Lysak and Well would never abandon them. Erwin, moved, takes a bite of the food and stands up, resolved not to retreat against any opponent. A few days later, Erwin and Ina begin training under Warren's guidance. Louise invites Well to train alongside her and her master. They must prepare for the next 2 years to become proper adventurers as they approach adulthood. To Well's surprise, Louise's master is Armstrong. Well realizes he may end up as muscle-bound as them, but decides to join their training with enthusiasm. 3 years later, in the Baumeister Knightdom's countryside, Well's family struggles to improve their land. Kurt is reviewing tax documents when his wife arrives with news: visitors from the capital. Kurt is surprised, but grows irritated upon learning the visitors have come about Well. At the castle, a visitor hands Kurt a letter from the capital's auditor. Kurt casually passes the letter to his wife, assuming it's just another request related to Well. He expresses frustration, saying he doesn't care how famous Well gets. However, his wife gasps after reading the letter, revealing that Well has died while exploring ancient ruins. Recently, Well had officially become an adult and a licensed adventurer, thrilled by his newfound freedom from noble duties, which allowed him to pursue adventures. His first mission was a royal request to explore ancient ruins. It seems Well remains the king's errand boy. With Brantag as their advisor, Well's party ventures into the ruins. Brantag informs them that previous adventurers were sent but never returned, and veteran adventurers sent afterward also vanished. The guild concludes that a dragon lurks there, and who better to face it than Well, the dragon slayer? Thus, their party is named Dragon Busters. While traversing the tunnels, Well scolds his party for hiding behind him, but Erwin points out that only Well has fought dragons, and their lives would be at risk if the creature breathes on them. Brantag uses detection magic to scout ahead before they proceed. To their surprise, the ruins are empty, with no signs of previous adventurers. Suddenly, Brantag senses something and warns everyone to get out, but it's too late, the doors close, and a magic circle traps them. The circle holds them in place while Brantag urges everyone to prepare for whatever comes next, as this is likely an ancient trap. Each party member disappears one by one. Elise tries to reach for Well's hand, but he vanishes before she can. A moment later, she too disappears. They awaken in a completely different room, greeted by a sign that reads, "Reverse Hanging." Brantag surmises they've been teleported to the ruin's deepest level and now they must climb back up to escape. Louise, optimistic, suggests we'll teleport them out, but Wells sadly informs them that his teleportation spell requires him to be fully aware of both his destination and his current location, which they do not know. Their only option is to climb. They ascend to the next level of the ruins, with Elise clinging to Wells' cloak. When they enter the next room, the door behind them slams shut, and soldier golems begin to stir. Well prepares to unleash his magic, but the others stop him, advising that they should conserve his energy since they don't know how many more floors they need to climb. The three warriors destroy the golems with their weapons, while Brantag and Well provide magical support. After the battle, Elise tends to their wounds. Ina notices skeletons lining the room's walls, and Brantag assumes these must be the remains of the previous adventurers. When they head toward the next staircase, they encounter more soldier golems. The group continues to fight, with Well casting one last, sorrowful glance at the adventurers as he wonders how much longer they can endure. Meanwhile, outside, the king and Armstrong begin to worry as 5 days pass with no news from Well's party. Nobles start to gossip that Well is likely dead, with some delighting in the rumored downfall of Baron Baumeister. When Cardinal Hohenheim walks by, the nobles express concern for his granddaughter, but he reassures them that Well and Elise are still alive. Just after, he bumps into Lord Commissioner Ruckner. The nobles' laughter reaches their ears, and they wonder who started the rumors of Well's death. Unbeknownst to them, the rumors are being spread by Baron Ruckner, the Lord Commissioner's brother, who is also the current castle auditor. He plans to send a letter to Kurt about Well's supposed death, hoping Well's title will pass to his own sons, part of his elaborate scheme to replace his brother as Lord Commissioner. Back in the ruins, the group is exhausted after 5 days of relentless fighting. Despite their wariness, Well keeps a positive attitude as he shares a meal with Elise. They alternate between resting and fighting, getting only 2 hours of sleep at a time. Though they are making progress, they can't keep going indefinitely. With each floor, they defeat the golems that await them, but their fatigue and injuries continue to mount. On the next floor, a larger room awaits with more golems, depleting their energy even further. Elise heals Erwin, who wonders if they will survive. Elise cheers him up, and Erwin laments that he hasn't yet defeated Warren, the Knight Commander, so he would regret dying now. His words stir something in Elise, who gazes longingly at Well. Before they enter the next floor, Elise encourages Well, promising that they'll escape soon or else she'll regret not marrying him sooner. Her words lift Well's spirits, and they head to the next floor, ready for battle. Surprisingly, this floor is just an empty space with no golem soldiers in sight. Erwin sighs in relief, but Brantag remains cautious. In the distance, he notices a large statue, which slowly awakens and reveals its form as a dragon golem. Brantag quickly casts a barrier spell, but just moments later, the dragon unleashes a lightning breath attack. Well casts his magic to reinforce the shield, but unfortunately, soldier golems manage to sneak up behind them and strike Ina. More golems pour in from the side doors, and the room is illuminated by their presence. They are surrounded, with the dragon in front and an army of golems behind them. Well and Brantag continue to shield their group from the dragon's breath, while Erwin and Louise fight off the soldier golems, giving Elise enough time to heal Ina. Ina's injuries are severe, and Elise expends all her mana, including the mana from her magic ring, just to get Ina back to full health. If the stalemate persists, Well and Brantag will soon run out of mana, and the dragon's breath will finish them off. Well decides to take down the golem. Brantag is doubtful, citing the dragon's mithril body, but ultimately trusts Well and gives him the rest of his magic power. Well pushes back the dragon's breath with his own magic beam. Eventually, Brantag runs out of mana and smiles at Well, remarking that Well reminds him so much of Alfred. Brantag passes out, leaving Well to fight the dragon alone. The others cheer Well on, but the dragon's strength proves overwhelming. Once again, Well is pushed back by the dragon's attack. As his consciousness begins to fade, Well apologizes to everyone. However, Elise suddenly declares she'll cast the Miracle Light spell. She quickly kisses Well on the lips before passing out, and Well catches her, feeling his magic surge. His strength returns, and with renewed power, he delivers a final blow to the dragon, who collapses, dead. The dragon's death deactivates all the other golems, allowing Well's team to rescue him and Elise. A few hours later, Well slowly wakes up to hear Louise and Ina discussing the earlier fight. They explain that Miracle Light is a healing spell that restores stamina and, in special cases, can also restore mana. They also speculate that Elise used the opportunity to get a kiss, thinking she might regret dying without expressing her feelings for the man she loves. When Well and Elise wake up, they meet Brantag, who is studying their new surroundings. He has learned that the creator of this place was a mage famous for making numerous magical items. He likely created everything to test people's worth. They will soon find out what they are being tested for. Erwin and the others call them over to show them something incredible. A massive shipyard with ancient airships, including the same type of airship that powers their kingdom's modern fleet. Erwin presses a button, causing one of the warehouse walls to open, revealing an exit from the ancient ruins. For their discovery of 7 ancient airships, the shipyard, the magic stones powering them, the soldier and dragon golems, and the accompanying research documents, Well's party is awarded 2 million gold coins each. This wealth ensures they will never have to worry about money again. Well then informs Armstrong that they plan to leave the capital and base their adventures in their home dukedom, Breichberg. Armstrong promises to hunt down the person spreading rumors of Well's death, which surprises Well as he had no idea what was going on in the castle during his absence. It seems other nobles were jealous of Well's success and had begun spreading malicious rumors about him. Ina adds that they too are being harassed due to their connection with Well. Now, with their 2 million gold, they expect even more unwanted attention. Ina suggests using the guild system to dispute the division of rewards so they can redistribute it all back to Well. Elise, as Well's fiancée, is also offering all her assets to him. In total, Well is now 10 million gold richer. Meanwhile, at Auditor Ruckner's mansion, the nobles conspiring against Well are having another meeting. They have decided to pool their resources to finally rid themselves of Well. Outside Well's mansion, a cloaked girl observes through the window, watching Well and the others enjoying cookies. Well notices the movement, but upon checking, sees no one. Deciding they need protection, he hires someone to guard the mansion once they return to Breichberg, as the growing number of people angry with Well calls for a strong, loyal guard. The others suggest taking on Roderich, the human fidget spinner, as a retainer. Roderich, who had long wanted to be Well's retainer, bursts into tears of joy when Well finally accepts. Later, Well notices something strange outside the window again, but the girl quickly hides. That afternoon, the girl tries spying again while they have lunch, but the others sense her presence. Louise runs to the window while Erwin stands between the window and Well. However, when they look outside, the spy has already gone. Roderich promises Well that he'll find the spy and advises him to leave the capital soon. Well replies that he can't leave just yet, as he still has something to do. Meanwhile, the pink-haired spy runs back to the city. Later that day, Well and his friends visit the Magic Guild, where researchers are studying the teleportation magic spell Well discovered in the ruins. The head researcher, Lucas, warmly welcomes them and shows them the magic circle Well is interested in. It's a new prototype capable of summoning anything the user can imagine. Erwin smirks and jokes that a panty thief would love such a device. Well steps forward to use the magic circle. He closes his eyes, focusing on the image he wants to summon. A few seconds later, the object materializes in front of him, a pair of panties that one of the mages had been wearing. The female mage slaps Lipliel. Well, while Elise looks on, clearly jealous. Well insists he got distracted by all the talk of being a panty thief, and claims this isn't what he intended to summon. He tries again, and this time he succeeds. The summoning light is so massive that it seems he might have summoned a giant's underwear. Later, the pink-haired spy watches Well and his friends leave the Mage Guild's building, pulling a large wagon. She tries to follow them, but Well teleports home. Meanwhile, outside Auditor Ruckner's mansion, Roderich watches as nobles conspiring against Well ride off in a carriage. He also notices Ruckner grinning wickedly from an upstairs window. The spy sneaks back into Well's mansion and, peering through a window, sees Well hosting a large party. It appears to be a going-away celebration before he leaves the capital, thanking those who helped him, including Duke Amadeus Bleichroder, Armstrong, Brantag, and even Cardinal Hohenheim. Well then brings out a large dish of sushi made from tuna, items he had actually summoned from the Mage Guild's teleportation circle. The nobles are curious about how to eat it, so Well demonstrates the proper way to eat it and use the soy sauce, a recipe he developed over 3 years. The guests enjoy it, while the spy watches enviously from outside. Meanwhile, Roderich reports that Auditor Ruckner was behind the rumors about Well's death. Well is surprised since he never spoke to the auditor, but Roderich explains that Ruckner was using these rumors to undermine Lord Commissioner Ruckner, who has strong ties to Well. Roderich also reveals that Ruckner sent a messenger to Wells' family, hoping that Kurt would feel indebted to him, and when Kurt's sons inherit Wells' title, it would increase Ruckner's influence. Thankfully, Roderich promises to distract Auditor Ruckner in the days to come. In his mansion, Ruckner learns that rumors about him orchestrating Wells' death in the ancient ruins are spreading throughout the city, and even the castle is summoning him. This was all part of Roderich's plan to counterattack with another false rumor. Roderich also reveals that he is actually Ruckner's bastard son. Elise then arrives with some tuna to offer, but the spy, unable to take it anymore, breaks into the mansion and starts walking toward Well. Erwin tries to stop her, but she flips him over easily. She charges toward Well, but to his surprise, she stops at the table and eats a slice of sushi instead. Lord Marshal Edgar, the kingdom's marshal, steps forward and introduces her as Wilma, his daughter. Wilma reveals that she's only investigating Well to see if he can feed her, having noticed all the delicious food he's had throughout the day. She tells Well he's passed her test and walks away with Elise to find more food. Edgar apologizes for his daughter's behavior, while Brantag remarks that Wilma seems to suffer from hero syndrome, meaning she always has magic flowing through her muscles, making her incredibly strong but with an insatiable appetite. Ina and Elise quickly warm to Wilma and want to feed her fatty tuna. Edgar actually hopes that Well will hire Wilma as a bodyguard and even offers her to him in marriage. Well rejects the offer, expressing his desire to go back to adventuring and monster hunting in their dukedom. This prompts Edgar to ask Duke Amadeus if he truly expects Well to hunt monsters, and Duke Amadeus smiles, explaining that he has a mission for Well. These events took place over the past few days. In the present, Kurt opens a letter informing him of Well's supposed death, which also details how their son could inherit Well's title. Kurt laughs at his sudden good fortune, but his wife screams upon seeing something outside. When Kurt looks outside, he sees Well and his friends arriving. Brantag leads the conversation between Well's group and Kurt, explaining how 15 years ago, the former Duke Bleichroder led an expedition into their forest in search of medicine. Unfortunately, this resulted in the death of 2,000 soldiers whose corpses have now become zombies. The current Duke, Duke Amadeus, has hired Well to purify them. What they want now is to discuss how to handle the monsters. Since the Enchanted Forest lies in Baumeister territory, they'll get a share of the sales from the raw materials obtained. The village chief, Klaus, says the usual percentage is 30%, but Kurt demands it be raised to 50%. This is unreasonable, and Brantag even points out that they are willing to return any recovered items from Baumeister's soldiers. Hermann, Kurt's second brother, pleads for reason, but Kurt is adamant, arguing that their soldiers didn't have many items, so they likely wouldn't get much, and they've already held funerals for them. Elise argues that proper peace for the dead comes from purifying their corpses, so she's willing to conduct the funerals again once the mission is completed. Kurt dismisses her and accuses her of being after the church's donation money. Fed up, Erwin slams his hand on the table, but Well quickly steps in to mediate. His friends point out that they're negotiating with the Lord, not his heir. Kurt is about to argue again, but everyone is saved when Wilma's stomach growls loudly, revealing she's craving the famous Baumeister watery soup. That evening, Kurt held a private meeting with the men from their territory. The men were pleased that their sons and brothers would finally be given peace and purification, but Kurt emphasized that Well was only there for a job and wasn't returning home. Kurt's insecurities about his position as heir were evident. Meanwhile, the others were having dinner. Hermann explained to Well that their eldest brother became difficult after Well left, as Kurt had always feared Well returning and taking his position. Marlene, Hermann's wife, arrived with food, and Wilma eagerly eyed it, while Marlene scolded Hermann for not offering Brantag some alcohol. To everyone's surprise, Brantag declined. Well encouragement for his mission, revealing that her grandfather was one of those killed during the expedition 15 years ago. Well promised to return anything he found belonging to her grandfather, and Marlene praised his kindness, wishing he were the heir. Meanwhile, others started to worry about a possible succession crisis. The next day, Well's party set off for the Enchanted Forest to begin their mission. They began insulting the undead, and despite being zombies, the undead understood the insults and appeared in large numbers. Everything turned red, as if a filter had been applied. Elise cast a magic circle with Well, creating a purification barrier around them. When the zombies crossed the barrier, they vanished. Erwin felt useless since they weren't directly involved, but Brantag reminded them that collecting the undead's belongings was also part of the mission. They continued until most of the undead were gone, even purifying the former Duke upon his appearance. The last one left was Marlene's grandfather, but before he could show up, an undead wyvern attacked. Wilma swiftly decapitated it with a single swing of her axe, and the purification magic activated. More undead animals appeared, and the party fought them off. Hours later, as the purification magic faded, Marlene's grandfather finally appeared, having evolved into a lich. He asked, well, explained that she was doing well. The undead dropped his sword and allowed Elise to purify him peacefully. After completing the mission, the party returned the undead's belongings to their families. The townspeople thanked Well, but Kurt suddenly arrived to make an announcement, demanding the collection of all the armor and swords. The townspeople hesitated, wanting to bury the armor in place of their loved ones, but Kurt insisted that their territory needed the metal for agriculture. To resolve the issue, Well summoned a block of iron to give to Kurt. Kurt was annoyed, but since Well was leaving soon, he accepted and walked away. Duke Amadeus assured Well that they would identify the owners of the remaining belongings. Well was relieved the mission was over and he could leave the family conflict behind, but the Duke ordered him to remain on standby. As Well and his party departed, Duke Amadeus and Lord Commissioner Ruckner observed them, continuing with their plan. Upon their return, the village chief asked if they would attend a funeral the following day. Elise led the ceremony while the townspeople grew angrier at Kurt for not attending the funeral of his own people. A grand dinner was held in remembrance of the fallen, and the townspeople offered Well wine. Well declined and suggested they offer it to Brantag, who had already refused earlier, which struck Well as odd. He noticed Kurt's wife, Amelie, and her sons paying their respects to the dead. Her sons were starstruck upon meeting Well and asked him for stories. Ina and Louise put on a show narrating Well's accomplishments, and Well handed out homemade candies afterward. After the celebration, late at night, the village chief approached a Kingmaker. Well again, quietly asking him to become the heir of the territory. Surprised, Well was told that this was the will of the people, as they had no future under Kurt. Well expressed his desire to remain an adventurer, but the chief suggested he could leave a retainer like Roderich to handle the day-to-day duties while still being the lord. Brantag appeared and revealed that this was also the wish of the royal family. Brantag reveals to Well the full details of the king's plan. The crown has wanted to develop the southern part of the kingdom for years, but this had never been accomplished due to the lords in those regions being ordinary people for generations. The current heir is also ordinary and difficult to deal with. The crown can't simply force his father to step down without angering every other lord in the country, so they came up with a new strategy. They sent to Ismares, Well back to his family to provoke his brother into action, which would lead to their father retiring early, taking responsibility for his heir's actions. This would allow Well to become the lord, especially since he had become well known among the peasants for his work purifying their dead loved ones. Brantag, refraining from drinking, ensured Well's safety despite his brother's scheming. Moreover, all the rewards Well had been receiving were actually for developing the land. The next morning, Well shares the king's plan with his party. They are surprised that Well is struggling with the decision since he usually follows the king's orders. However, they soon understand when they see Well playing with his nephews. If Well accepts the position of lord, these children will lose their future as nobles. Unbeknownst to them, the village chief overhears their conversation. That evening, a commotion interrupts Well's dinner as the townspeople arrive, wanting to petition Well to become the heir. Herman tries to reason with them, but the townspeople insist that they aren't afraid of any punishments and want to delay Well to make a decision before he leaves the next day. Well is confused since he never planned to leave. Meanwhile, Brantag notices the village chief watching from the bushes. He confronts him and warns him that the crown doesn't like citizens interfering with their plans. The village chief leaves, but warns Brantag to be careful around Kurt's wife, Lady Amelie. True to his warning, Amelie is watching the confrontation from her window. She also overhears Kurt talking to a few citizens, ordering harsh punishments for anyone who commits treason against him. The next morning, Well continues to contemplate his decision and learns from Brantag that if he accepts the position, Kurt won't be exiled, but will be permanently silenced to avoid complications. In his next meeting with Kurt, Well tries to propose a compromise. He offers Kurt some undeveloped land when he becomes lord, promising to help him rank up and provide funding, This way, everyone's lives could improve and the family would advance. Kurt, disgusted by the offer, assumes Well is trying to swindle him and steal away his authority. He orders Well to leave. Outside, Well runs into Amelie. He admits that his compromise wouldn't make anyone happy, but was the best way to avoid harm. Amelie reveals that she doesn't care about anything as long as her children are safe and is trying to get them closer to Bud. Well, so he wouldn't take their nobility. Well thanks her for the conversation and leaves. Back at his place, Well tells his friends he has decided to accept the position of Lord, but insists that no one will die in the process, asking for their help. Everyone smiles and assures him they will always support him. The next day, they set up a bazaar in town, with Well selling homemade condiments, Louise selling clothes, Ina with handcrafts, and Erwin with weapons. The townsfolk flock to buy from them, which frustrates Kurt's supporters as Well steals their customers. They complain to Kurt and ask if they should just kill Well, but Kurt quickly dismisses the idea, warning them that they would all die if they tried. The next day, Kurt's last henchman reports to him about an ambush by Well's men, but none of his henchmen were hurt. In fact, they had all turned against Kurt, having been offered funds and training to improve their businesses by then. Well hopes this will push Kurt to finally take action. Meanwhile, he and Roderick are looking for a safe place for Amelie and her sons once the scandal erupts. For Kurt, their plan is to send him to a church to avoid being killed by the crown. Well only needs to convince Cardinal Hohenheim of his plan. At the same time, another plot is brewing. Auditor Ruckner hands an artifact to his subordinate and orders him to deliver it to Kurt. A few days later, Kurt was frustrated when only one person showed up for their meeting. Everyone else now supported Well, and the final person admitted that Well had offered him training in the capital as well. He quickly left the room, leaving Kurt in despair. With no other option, Kurt prepared to kill Well with his knife. However, a voice interrupted him, asking if that would be enough. It was the auditor's subordinate who handed Kurt an artifact called the Dragon's Flute. The subordinate apologized for the mistaken information about Well's death and gave Kurt the artifact as a gesture of goodwill, asking for his support in negotiations for undeveloped land. Kurt, grinning, agreed happily. A few days later, Brantag sensed Kurt approaching the forest alone. They had spread rumors about Well entering the forest by himself to lure Kurt into attacking. Their plan to scandalize Kurt was nearing its completion, though they were surprised he came alone. Brantag speculated that Kurt likely had a hidden advantage. Well encountered Kurt in the forest and pretended their meeting was a coincidence. But Kurt saw through the act and called for Well's retainers to reveal themselves. Kurt was exasperated with his younger brother, who had slain a dragon, earned a title, and now seemed intent on stealing his position as heir. He warned Well not to move and threatened to play the dragon's flute. Brantag immediately recognized the flute and explained that it could summon dragons. Ina pointed out that fighting dragons wasn't new to them, but Brantag cautioned that multiple dragons at once could overwhelm them, even with Well's magic. Elise tried to appeal to Kurt's sense of compassion, reminding him that the dragons would harm civilians as well. But Kurt didn't care. He felt betrayed by everyone and was determined to steal Well's wealth, become a hero, and replace his family. With Kurt threatening them, Well couldn't act, and Brantag decided to strike first. But when Brantag attacked, the magic laser bounced off the flute. Kurt grinned and blew into the flute, causing the sky to rumble and ghosts to rise from the ground. The tune was powerful, but the ghosts started to surround Kurt instead. Well moved to help, but Wilma stopped him from rushing in. It turned out that the flute wasn't actually a dragon's flute. Brantag suspected it was a flute of malice, which draws on malice to empower the user, but ultimately turns them into the undead. As Kurt continued to play, dark thoughts filled his mind, and his vision turned red. The ghosts formed a massive creature with Kurt at its center. Brantag urged Well to use holy magic, but Well just stared as the creature attacked. Elise stepped in to purify the monster, but it was too strong, and she was pushed back. She was willing to sacrifice herself to stop it, but Well snapped out of his stupor and rushed to help. He told Elise to expand the magic as they had done in the Enchanted Forest. With a final glance at his brother's transformed body, Well unleashed his magic, enveloping the creature in golden light until it was purified, leaving only the flute behind. Kurt's malevolent spirit fled across the kingdom. The next day, knights sealed off the mansion of Auditor Ruckner. where Well and Roderich learned that Ruckner and his conspirators had died from the spirit. The spirit had been purified by priests, but rumors began circulating that Kurt was responsible for the events. This made it difficult for Emily and her sons to move there. In the end, they relocated to live with Herman. Well resented being called a hero when he couldn't even save anyone. He despised the backstabbing ways of the nobility and their hidden agendas. Brantag, however, reminds Well that he is also a noble with his own schemes. This realization makes Well aware of his own hypocrisy, and he spends the day reflecting quietly as he walks through town, even remaining silent during dinner with his friends. That evening, Well asks Elise if she ever noticed him being out of touch with reality. Elise admits she has, mentioning how sometimes he feels distant, even when he's right beside her. Well realizes that he is still clinging to the idea of his old life, unable to fully embrace the reality of this world. Elise holds his hand, and Well smiles, promising that he will work to become a proper noble from now on. The next time Well is summoned by the king, he is granted all the undeveloped land taken from the Baumeister knightdom. The king then asks what reward Well desires. Well requests the authority to appoint 2 of the 12 noble positions that have opened up due to the deaths at Auditor Ruckner's estate. The king becomes serious, as he alone should have the power to grant titles. Lord Marshal Edgar criticizes Well for his bold request, and Cardinal Hohenheim orders him to retract it. Despite this, Lord Edgar suggests the undeveloped land should be given to someone else. Lord Amadeus defends Well, but the other nobles accuse him of only seeking to expand his own territory. An argument ensues until Armstrong interrupts, instructing Well to withdraw his request as well, noting that it has disturbed the palace's peace. Armstrong then requests a portion of the undeveloped land for himself. The king takes control and rejects Armstrong's proposal, reaffirming that Well will be the one to develop the land. Armstrong subtly winks at Well, pleased that his plan worked. Well the ability to bestow 2 noble titles and elevates his rank to count, to the applause of everyone. Later, the king praises Well for his cleverness, though he scolds Armstrong for being too obvious. Armstrong laughs loudly, revealing that the king had seen through their schemes. Back in the countryside, Well tells Emily that he plans to grant the 2 noble titles to her sons when they come of age. Emily is surprised and pleased, telling Well that her sons will understand that their father's death was caused by Kurt's own actions. Meanwhile, Well begins developing his newly acquired land, which mirrors the events of the first episode. Plans are in motion to clear more land, particularly for the church supported by Cardinal Hohenheim, as well as the facilities that Lord Commissioner Ruckner, Lord Marshal Edgar, and Duke Amadeus plan to build in exchange for their support in helping Well secure the right to grant the titles. However, they are not allowed to interfere with one particular project. Well reveals plans for a miso and soy sauce workshop. Soon, others arrive with their own requests, leaving Well feeling both confused and happy in his new busy, noble life. That evening, Well shares a joyful meal with his friends, realizing that being the 8th son wasn't so bad after all.